Hello everyone, welcome back to Code with Beto. In this video, we are going to learn how to create this beautiful pixel perfect chart that we have in this demo. So as you can see, we're going to have a couple of examples. The first one is going to be for the income. We're going to be using the budget body app that we actually built in this channel. And if you are curious about it, you can just go to codewithbeto.dev and check out the projects that we have here. You can search if you want, or you can just simply scroll a little bit. This is the budget body app that we are going to be using. And in this case, we want to integrate this chart. By the way, if you want to check out the source code for this specific video, it's going to be available as well here at codewithbeto.dev. So make sure that you check it out. As you can see, we have the income and expense tabs. And the cool thing about this is that we are using data coming from a SQLite database in our application. But of course, you can use any database or any data that you have to show this chart. In the case that you're using a database, an SQL database, we're going to learn how to fetch this data weekly in this case. But I'm thinking on integrating as well monthly and yearly as well. So this is how it looks. We can press next and we have this really nice animation when we are looking at the income. If I move forward to the next week, we have the same animation as you can see here, but the color changes because now this is an expense and you can see the total of this week. In this case, we don't have anything, so that we just display 0. And yeah, so this is basically what we're going to be doing, guys. This is going to be changing. We're going to apply linear gradients, as you can see here, that look very nice. We can change the colors based on the value of each column. So for example, you can see that the ones that have 0 or less than 100, let's see if we can find one less than 100, like this one here, it's going to be gray. And you can continue these kind of validations to change the color based on the value if you want. You can extend this a little more. For example, whenever you press on each value, you can display something else or take the user to a modal screen or something like that. But yeah, this is what we're going to be doing, guys. So if you are interested, make sure that you stick till the end. And without further ado, let's start with the video. Alright guys, now as always, if you want to become a master with React Native or React with TypeScript or GitHub and Git, make sure that you go to codewithbeto.dev and check out the courses that we have there. Now let's start creating this application. Now, as I mentioned before, budget body app uses SQLite, as you can see. And if you are curious and you want to learn how to build it, you can just go to check out this video. But SQLite, it's a database that lives locally in the device. So the first thing that I want to do is actually get some data for this, for this kind of test, right? Because we need a bunch of data from, years, for example, let's say like at least 5 years, and we need items between these years, between these months, depending on how extensible you want to create this application. So for this use case, I actually went ahead and generated some data using Mocro. It's this really nice website. I'll leave the link in the project, but basically you can generate inserts for your database just by providing the field name. Let me make this a little bigger so that you can see the type and some options. This is really nice. And as you can see here, I generated 1,000 rows and that was super quick. Now, in order to test or see the fields that we have in the database, I'm going to be using Table Plus, which is a database management tool that allows you to manage any kind of database. In this case, we're using SQLite, as you can see here, but they provide support for many databases, as you can see there. And this Table Plus tool was recommended to me by this guy called Naven on Twitter. He's really nice, so if you want to follow him, he shares some really nice things. Okay, now that we know what tools we're going to be using for the database and how we can generate dummy data, let's jump into the code. So I have here the app running. Sorry, this is the code of the app. So the first thing that I want to do is just say yarn iOS, and let me stop the other server. Okay, so I'll just run yarn iOS. This will create a build and this will open the application. By the way, the library that we're gonna be using, guys, for this project is going to be React Native Gifted Charts, which is a popular and modern, well-maintained library for creating charts. And they have, some examples here if you want to check out the GitHub. But yeah, let's go ahead and install this library. So the first thing that I want to do is stop again the server. And then we need to install React Native gifted charts, as you can see here. Now, in order for gifted charts to work properly, we need to install as well Expo Linear Gradient, because we're gonna have gradients, right? And then we also need to install React Native SVG. These are per dependencies for gifted charts. So let's go ahead and hit enter. And let's wait a little bit. All right, there we have it. Now we can say yarn iOS. This is going to build the application and install it again into the device. Now, while this is being, okay, so we have an issue here. It seems that we need to install again, dependencies. And I think this is an issue related to cache. So what we can do is pre-build again the project. I pre-built this for iOS only, and then provide the flag clean. This will install dependencies from 0. So I'll say yes. Okay, and let's scroll a little down. So here we have the project. Now, for those who are not familiar with this project, it's very simple actually. Now, the important thing to mention, I would say, is that we are using SQLite. Let me say yarn iOS. And the database is going to live inside this MySQL DB. And as you can see here, we can come here and click the database. And I am using this extension SQLite Viewer. And this is how it looks. Let me select the transactions. And we are able to see these transactions here. Okay. So we have 22, I think, here. So if I scroll, so in this example, actually, we have many more. I'm not sure why. Okay, I think this is the previous application. Let's wait a second until this is done, and we'll see how many we have in this application. But in this database, so we can just come quickly here and use this to view the items that we have here. Just let's go quickly. Each transaction is going to have an ID, a category ID, amount, date. Date, it's been handled as seconds, and weekly groceries. For example, this is the description of the expense and then the type of expense. So it can be an expense or income actually. And that's how it looks. So very simple stuff. I'll just go ahead and close this. Now, the first thing that I want to do is go to my screens. We only have one screen, which is the home screen, and a couple of components here for adding transactions and transaction list item to display items, right? But we're not gonna be using that. We just care about the data. So let's quickly go to this return in the home screen. And yeah, so this is how it looks. I'll just go ahead and comment this add transaction button since I don't want it for now. And I also will, comment this transaction summary. I'll just leave the list for now and hit save. I don't want to show this for now. Maybe later, right? So let's go ahead and create a new component for the chart. And I'll call this one summary chart.tsx. All right, this is going to be our, our component to display the chart. And the application was successfully compiled after the clear. Let's see what's going on here on the right. So I think this is picking up my other database. I have a bunch of data in this case, because this is at the end of the day in the same repo. So let's see the DB. Let me quickly go here. because I'm loading the DB. I forgot where. Check the app, scroll up. Okay, so we are yeah, loading from the assets. So I guess I did the insert before, before pushing this code, and now I have a bunch of items. But I wanted to show you guys how you can do that. And the way you can do that is by using Table Plus, this application that I was mentioning before. And so you can just simply, let me try to make this a little bigger. Let's see if I can do that. Nope. So the way it works is basically you create a new connection and then select your database. In this case, this one lives in my desktop budget body app. I'll cancel. But then you have something very similar to what we have here with the extension. You are able to see the items here once you click. But this tool is more complete since it allows you to write some SQL queries. And after I generated my inserts, I paste them here and then select all of them and run the current query, and this will insert 1,000 items in the database, in the transactions table. So what I can do is, maybe for you, just copy this if you don't want to generate them manually. I'll copy this for you, and you can find it inside the db.sql. And actually we have some inserts here for the previous tutorial, but what I'll do is just copy these inserts in case you want to have them, and then I'll just comment them for now. Okay, so you have all this data if you want to play around with this application. I'll leave it here. You can find it here once you get the code from codewithbeto.dev. Cool. So yeah, we have the home screen. Now this is how it looks. We don't have anything, so we can start working on the summary. We have the data, we have all we need. So let's see how we can start working with these charts. I'll start by importing all as React from React. Sorry, export default function, summary, chart, return. All right, and now TypeScript is complaining. Let me just create a view from React Native here. And then just a text, chart, and I'll import this text from React Native and hit save. Oh, what am I doing? I'm exporting React. Sorry about that. There we go. All right, so here we have the app. Let's try to use this component in our only screen, which is the home screen. So let's go to the home screen, and you can do this in your own component, right? Now we also have this transaction home, and actually we have this transaction history. And what I'll do here is, instead of using this component, I'll come up here and add my home, sorry, not home, my summary chart, and hit save. All right, now I'm not able to view anything. Let's go back. Okay, and it was loading actually. So I have a lot of items, as you can see here, and this is why it's taking some time. So what I'll do here is, when I'm getting the transactions, all from transactions, instead of grabbing all from here, I'll just limit this. I think I can do limit and then say like 10. I'm not sure if this will work. Let me try to format this a little bit. Okay, this is not going to work, it seems. Okay, I think I need to remove this and reload the app. Okay, so now I'm bringing only 10 items. Of course, if you have thousands of items, it's recommended that you use pagination, right? So we only have 10 items here for now. This is good for now. And we have the text, right, charged. And now I'm able to update. So this is very fast now, and we still have a bunch of data in the database, right? So we can use that data to display the chart. Cool. So we have that. Let's start building our chart. So I want to start with my chart. So I'll say bar chart. And this is a component that comes with React Native gifted charts. And this component is going to take a bunch of things. The first one is going to be the data. And data is nothing more than an array of values. And if you, as you can see here, each object inside this array can have many properties like the bar style and the value. But the most important thing, I would say, it's going to be the value. But you can, take a look at all these things that we have here, and we're going to play around with this. For example, color, front color, red. But now here I have a warning because the only item that is required is going to be the value. So inside this object, I need to provide a value. So in this case, I'll say 200 and hit save. This should generate a a chart, as you can see here. And this looks good, huh? Super easily, we were able to create our chart with hard-coded data. And as you may imagine by now, we can add more items and more items. For example, this one, let's duplicate it. Let me add a comma here, hit save, so that we have this nice format, and we can play around with these colors. For example, I can say blue, and if you don't provide any color, it's going to be black by default. But yeah, let's say front color, purple, hit save, very nice. And the cool thing about this is that it has a scroll from left to right. This is how it looks. But as you can see, it's cutting the view. So the next thing that I want to do, it's actually provide a height and width for my chart. So let's say height, and the height is going to be 200, and width for now it's going to be 290. You can play around with these values, of course, so that it's responsive. But for now, let's hard code it to 200. Then we can provide something like bar width. And if I say 10, this is going to be the width of each bar. And at this point, I'll leave 18 for the width. We also have a min height. So that means if we don't have anything in this value, or if we have 0, we will provide a minimum height of, let's say, 3. Okay, so now if I come here and add a value of 0, we can see this min height, and if I change it to be 30, that's how it looks. Let me remove this. I don't really like the red. Okay, so that's the min height. Let's leave it at 3. I think that's going to be nice. We can also provide a border radius for the bars, and I'll use 3 just to give it a little bit of roundiness. And now we get to the cool part. We can show a gradient, and this is a boolean. We can say true and hit save, and this is going to apply a gradient. Now this doesn't look good, but you can also provide the gradient color that you want to use. So for example, if I say gradient color green, this will combine green with the front color of the bar, and that's the result. Now, for now, I'll just go ahead and delete this gradient. By the way, you can also specify the gradient directly here. So let's say green, just for this specific bar, and that's how it looks. Cool. Now, before I continue, guys, I was forgetting that you can actually use other kind of charts like line chart or edge position, pie chart, but in this case, we're gonna be using the bar chart. Cool. So yeah, let me remove this gradient for now and hit save. I'll also remove this. Okay, cool. So that's how it looks. We can also play around with this spacing between items, for example, 20 or 100. This will give a lot of distance between items and you can scroll to view them. And that's how it looks. Okay, so let's change this to be 20. Cool. Yep. So from here, we can play around with the number of sections. Let's say 2. And as you can see here on the left side, this is going to be only 2 items between 0 and the top, which is 200 in this case, right? So if I say, you can play around with this value, like 5, you only have 5 numbers. So for this, we will use only 4 and hit save. Cool. Now we can, remove some things, like for example, the axis thickness, y-axis thickness. We can set this to 0 so that we don't have this line or 1, or if you want, you can make it very, thick. In this case, I don't want it, so I'll just provide a 0. And we can do the same thing for the x-axis. So let's hit save. And now our chart is looking good. Finally, later you can also play with the axis of labels style. Okay, you can do the same thing for the y-axis, label text style, y-axis text style. Okay, and in this case, I'm going to be using actually color gray for this. So if we hit save, we should be able to see this color. And let me remove this, hit save. Yeah, so now these numbers are gray. Cool. Labels. So yeah, very nice. Well, we are able to, really customize this, and we have many other things that we can do. If you just, check this active opacity, for example, for whenever you touch a bar, you can play around with that as well. They also have this is animated, and hit save. And for the is animated, now if I reload the app, you can see that we have this animation. Okay, so it's looking good for now. We can play around as well with the animation duration, and I'll be using a 300 milliseconds. So if we reload the application, it's going to be a little faster, which is nice. We don't want to be waiting. And yeah, this is how it looks, guys. Now, you can also play with some other things, like I was mentioning before, like the background color of the chart. You can set it to red. What else? You can show line. This is a line on top of the bars. We can hide it. Of course, we don't want it in this case. You can play with the dash. So dash width can set it to 20, for example, or in this case, just 0. We can also play with the dash gap. We can set it to 10, for example. And yeah, so I think this is good enough for now. This is simple enough, easy to understand. Now, the tricky part, I would say, when we are integrating these kind of views, it's going to be make it look good, right? With dynamic data. So in this case, we know that we have income and expenses in this database. So let's leverage this data and display something better. Now, before I do that, I want to wrap this into a card. I have this card component, which will make it look better. Yep, as you can see there. Now we can add some more things like the title of this chart in here. We can have a text that says hello chart. Okay, looks better, right? Let me see if I can provide a style and say margin bottom of 16, just so that we have some spacing here. So let's bring our data. In this case, I'm using the SQLite library from Expo. So to grab my DV, I'll use SQLite hook. to use the context of the database so that we can start making queries, right? This is going to be the instance of my database. Now, we're going to be handling, in this case, searching and querying data by week. So let's keep that in mind. Now, since I'm going to be fetching this data, I have to create a variable using useState to hold this data. Now, the type of this data is going to be bar data item, and it's going to be a list or an array. So let's import this type from the library. Okay, and let's initialize this to be an empty array. Okay, now we can say here bar data, or I think chart data, it's better, set chart data. And yeah, this is how it looks. Now, instead of having these hard-coded values, we can use this, but I'll wait a little bit because we don't have anything yet, and we will have only an empty chart. So this is what we're gonna be using. Now, we need to get the data. So for that, I'll use a use effect. So whenever the component mounts, I'll fetch some data. So yeah, let's create a function called fetch data. And this is going to be an async function that is going to get some data. Now, like I was mentioning before, guys, in this case, we're going to handle only bringing items weekly, every week. But I want to extend this to be able to bring items monthly and yearly. So for that, it's a good idea to have an enum. And I'll create an enum called period. And we will have a period of week, which is going to be just a week like this. We will have a month, and it's going to look something like this. And finally, we will have a year. Okay, so I'm going to be using this, to store the period that the user wants to see. And for that, I will create as well another variable. So I'll duplicate this and call this one chart period, and set chart period. Okay, now this is going to be of type period. Okay, and I'm going to initialize this or give it the default value of week. Cool. So now inside my fetch data, I want to first check if the chart period is equal to, and then we can use the enum by say period week. Now, if they want to get the week data, we can continue. So the first thing that we need to do a couple of things here. First, we need to get the start date and end date of this week. Okay, so in this case would be like 7 days. So for that, we are going to create a helper function. Now, this is step one. We need to get the start and end date of this weekly period. Then we also need to keep track of the current date, right? Because based on the current date, I want to either add next days, look at the next week by adding 7 days, or look at the previous week by subtracting 7 days from the current date. So it's a good idea to have the current date here. So I'll say current date and set current date equal to useState. We're going to be using useState for this, and this is going to be of type date. Let's initialize this to be the current date by saying new date. Now, I want to keep track of the end date as well. So let's say current end date and set current end date. So basically, I'm creating two variables to store these values, right? The start of the period and the end of the period. The period is going to change between week, month, and year. So it's a good idea to keep track of these two variables. Okay, sounds good. So let's get the week range. In order to do that, I'll create a new function down here. And this function is going to be named get week range. This is an arrow function, and this should be like that. Now we're going to pass the date here, and this is going to be of type date as parameter. And let's calculate the start of the week. So this is going to be equal to a new date. But in this case, we need to set the date to the first date of the week, right? Because right now it's Wednesday and I want to start this with Monday, right? I don't want to start from Wednesday plus 7 or 6 days. So let's say date, set date. We're going to set the date, and then we can say get date minus date dot get day. Okay, this will give me the start of the week. Now let's get the end of week. New date as well. Let's set the date. This is going to be easy now that we have the start of the week, so we can use the start of the week, get date, and then just add 6 days by saying plus 6. Hit save. All right, so we have now the start of the week and the end of the week. Now we need to, return this so that we can use this function when we are fetching the data by week. So we can say return, and let's just return an object that will have the start date, and this will be the start of the week. But we are handling these records. So if I show you quickly here, the date, we're handling it in seconds, as you can see here. So we need to return this date in seconds. So we can do get time. This will return, as you can see here, the milliseconds. So get time. Now to make sure that this is just a number, we can say math.floor, and then we can floor this. Okay, now we need to do the same thing for the end date. So end date is going to be equal to end of week dot get time math floor, and I'm missing a comma here. All right, and let's hit save. So, this is not too complicated. Basically, we're just getting the start of the week, the end of the week date, getting the milliseconds, and returning it. All right, so now that we can calculate this based on the current date that we're passing here, we can say const equal to get week range passing the current date. Oops, current date, like that. Now this will return the end date and start date. Okay. All right, so now we have these. So once we get the end date, I want to set the end date, the current end date. Okay, passing the end date. Because we were, we were initializing this to the same date as the current date. So I want to quickly update this. Now this is complaining because remember, this is a number so far. So let's convert this to a date by saying new date and then pass it like that. All right. Now we have the start and end date. Now I need to get the data. All right. So get the data. Once we get the data, we need to update the bar data or the chart data. And that's all we need to do, right? So get the data. In order to get the data, we need to have some interactions with my database, right? So let's minimize this function of the get week range, and I'll create a new function, and I'll name this one fetch weekly data. This is going to be an async arrow function. And we need to pass a couple things to this variable, to this function. The first one is going to be the range. So we need the start date. This is going to be of type number. Remember that we're managing this in seconds in the database. So I'm passing a number. End date is going to be a number as well. Sorry, it's milliseconds, I think. And then I want to specify as well in this function the type of the transaction that we want to get. Now, currently, if we go to the database here, each transaction comes with a type, expense or income. Okay, so let's copy this and let's come here. And I want to say that this type is going to be either income or expense. So I can just type it like this. And yeah, this is how it looks. So now inside this function, we can have a try catch, for example. And if we have an error, I'll just put it in the console. And inside this try catch, inside this try, we need to specify the query. Okay, so the query is going to look something like this. First of all, I'm going to say select. And then this is going to be a little bit trickier because we need the total amount of income or the total amount of expenses per day of the week. So for that, we can use this strf time. So this is going to look like this. Let me actually copy paste it. I get this with help of ChatGPT. So I want to give it a little bit of format. So this is what this is doing, guys. Basically, is calculating the total, the date of the week as day of the week, right? And this is going to be the number of the day. So if the day is Sunday, we want to get the total amount spent, the total income or the total expense of Sunday, right? And that's why we are dividing this into 1,000, since this is going to come as milliseconds. And then we're grabbing the day of the week, and also we're adding up the amount as total. So if I say I want to grab all the income, this is going to sum all the income in this day, or all the expenses in this day, either Sunday, Monday, whatever. Okay. Now we need to say that we want to grab this from, let me delete this space. So I'll say from transactions, which is the name of my table. And then I'll say where date is greater or equal to the start date. Now, when we are passing variables here, we need to pass a question mark. So I'll say and date it's less or equal than the end date, which is my second variable, and the type is equal to my third variable, which is going to be income or expense. Okay, makes sense. Now we can group this by day of week. Now this day of week is coming from here, and I want to group them by day of week. And finally, we can say order by day of week. Okay. A ascending. Okay. So this is the query that is going to do the trick. Got it? Now we need to pass these variables: start, date, end date, and the type of transaction. So let's pass that in this. So we have the query. Now we can use this to get the result of this query by awaiting dv.getAllAsync. All right, and this is going to get me the data. And this async requires the query. So let's pass the query, and also variables. In this case, the variables are going to be start date, end date, and type. And the order matters. So the first one is going to be this one. The second one is going to be placed here. Third one is going to be placed here. So this makes sense, right? Now, the type that this is going to return, since I'm saying day of week and also total, the type that this is going to return, we can type it here using a generic. So I'll say this is going to return a day of week of type number from 0 to 6, and then total for each day, which is going to be a number. So this is going to be the return value. Now, if I hover here, we can see that this is going to return an array of this type that I just specified here. All right. So at this point, we can maybe take a quick pause and put this in the console, and I'll say result and hit save. All right, so this is my function, fetch weekly stuff. And then actually I need to return this data because I'm not returning this. So I'll return this data down here. All right, and hit save. We're putting this in the console. Now let's go back to the get data comment in here. So in here, what I can do is say const data equal to await fetch weekly data. Okay, now this will take the start date, the end date, and the type. So I'll say transaction type, and I need to create, a variable to hold this. So let's create a new state variable. I'll duplicate this one, and then let me see. I'll copy this and paste it here. Transaction type and set transaction type. So this is going to be either, expense or income. So we actually have the type here. Let's copy this and I'll destructure this type without this. Okay. And then we can initialize this to be income and hit save. Okay, so we have the transaction type. We are passing it here. Then this will give us the data. And yep, so instead of actually using this console log, what I can do is put it in here, console log data, and hit save. Now let me open the console. Now I'm not calling this function, so let's call it right after. Okay, and hit save. And as you can see, there we have it. We have this data. So it's an array that comes with day of week, which is 4. Total, it's going to be 1830 in this case. And then we also have another item, 6, which is with the total for that day. In this case, this is income, but we can change it to be expenses, for example. So now that we know that we're getting this data, we need to format this data, right? Because this is not meeting the required type of data for the chart. So we need to somehow process this data and give it the right format. So let's go ahead and create a helper function. And for this function, maybe we can create a new folder, not here, but in the root folder, called utils. And inside this, I'll create a new file called chart query, or just process weekly data, or data process helpers. I think this is better, and TypeScript. So these are going to be helper functions. In that case, we should have, a weekly, monthly, and things like that. But in this case, I'll have just the weekly. So I'll say process weekly data. Okay, and this is going to be an arrow function that is going to take the data. Now the data that we are going to pass is going to be the return type of this transaction. So let's copy this type. Might be a good idea to create it, but I'll just be lazy and put it in line in here. This is going to be an array of this item. That's why I'm adding these two brackets. And then this will get as well a transaction type. So let's say transaction type. This is going to be either income or expense in this case. And we can also initialize this to be income by default. So let's hit save, and this is how it looks. Now, because we know that we want a fixed number of days, I'll create this array with the days, Sunday, Monday, all the way until Saturday. And then let's start by iterating and generating the data that we need. So the data that we need is going to be the bar data, right? If we come down here, this is the bar data that I'm talking about. We need this format. So I'll create a variable to hold this information. Now I'm going to start by iterating over the days array. So I'll use map. This will return a new array that will allow me to iterate over each label, which means Sunday all the way to Saturday. And what I want to return here for each item, it's going to be the label, which is Sunday, Monday, etc. The value, and yeah, so the value is going to be 0 by default. This assures that we are going to have always this number of elements in the chart. So I have these two for now. And now once we have that, what I want to do is iterate over the data that we're passing, the raw data. So I'll say for each item, I want to get, first of all, the day index from the item dot day of week. Okay, so yeah, I'm getting this day of week here. Once I have the day index, I can say if, remember, this day index is going to be from 0 to 6, I believe. So once I have, this is 0, this is 1, 2, 3, all the way to Saturday. So once I have the index, I can simply iterate over each item and say that if the index is greater or equal than 0 and day index is less than 7, then what I want to do is say bar data at position day index dot value, and I'll set the value to whatever we have in this item, which is the total. And yeah, so we are setting the value and the label. Once we have done this, we can return the bar data and hit save. So let's go back. Let's scroll up where we are here. So now we need to set the chart data. So I'll just remove this console log for now that we know the format that we are getting. And I'll say set chart data, passing the data after being processed. So let me export const process weekly data. So I'll say process weekly data, and then I'll pass the raw data. And then we also need to specify the transaction type. In this case, I'll say transaction type, which is this value, right? All right, now this is complaining. Argument of type date of the week is not assignable to a type of parameter of the week array. So I guess I can say, this is not going to be null because I know that we have data. So we can add this exclamation mark. And then we are setting the data finally. Once we have the chart data, we can come down here and say chart data and hit save. All right, and there we have it. So now this is working fine. And if I reload, we should be able to view this real data coming from the database, which is really cool. All right, now let's start by thinking on the colors of this data, right? Because we have, all black right now. And here in this function is where we are going to be handling this kind of validations based on the transaction type. Okay, so first of all, I need to say, is this transaction income? So I'll say, is income equal to, it's going to be true if the transaction type is equal to income. So I'm just abstracting this validation. And now based on this, I can add in here front color, for example. Front color, we can hard code any value here for each value. Let me paste this down here, and we need a gradient color. So for these two values, I'm going to have these colors. Let me copy paste them. This is going to be like the default color, and I need to add this. Okay, and this is the gray color, right? Gray color, I want this, for items that are 100 or less. And then for items greater than that, I want to be green if it's income and red if it's an expense. So down here, when we are generating the value for each item, we can do basically the same. We can duplicate this, and instead of passing this value, I'd say gradient. Sorry, this is going to be gradient color, and this gradient color, it's going to be here as well. Okay, so this gradient color. Now this is complaining, so I'll just say as any for now. Gradient color is going to be equal to, depending on the value. So this is going to be inside this if, and I'll say if the item dot total is less than 100, then I want this to be gray. Okay, so for the gradient color, and then we can also say front color. We need to set these two values for each bar, and I'll use the same colors. Okay, so let's copy and paste here and hit save. Now this is a validation if the item is less than 100, but otherwise, if the item is greater, I want to use other colors depending on the income, and I'll just go ahead and copy these colors depending on is income. So is income, let me rename this variable. So if it's income, then I want to use a greenish color, and if it's not income, I want to use an orange reddish color. Okay, and hit save. All right, and this is how it looks. Now let me add this switch. By the way, this is looking bad because we need to come back to the chart and enable the gradient. So let's say show gradient and hit save. Okay, and now this is looking very nice. Let me move this a little up and hit save again. This is looking great, and as you can see, the validation is applying. Now let's add the option to switch between income and now let's add the option to switch between income and expense, and for that I'll be using a segmented control, and this is actually a package that we learn to use when we are creating this application. And this segmented control is just a buttons to, to select either income or no. So we need to specify values for this. We're going to have income and then expense and hit save. And this is what it is, the segmented control. This is how it looks. Okay. So now let me quickly add a style in here. And I'll say width of 200. I'll give it a fixed width and you'll see why in a moment. Well, actually, let me just remove this for now. I think we don't need it. Yeah, so next I want to have a selected index. Now the selected index is going to be depending on the transaction type. Because we only have 2 items here, I can say if the transaction is income, then the index should be 0, otherwise should be 1. Then we also need to specify an unchanged event here. This will return an event. And this event will get me the index of the value, but I need to grab this from the native event. So I have to say event.native event. And then from here, I can say selected segment index. And once I have this index, I can say, I can say set transaction type and then based on the index. So if index is equal to 0, then I want to set this to be income. Otherwise, I want to set this to be an expense. So let's hit save. And now if I come here and switch, I should be able to see, that this is an expense, but this is not working. The reason why this is not working is because this bar chart, it's memoizing this data, which means even though I'm updating it, they won't calculate again all the rendering for performance. So in this case, we need to trigger a manual update for this chart. And the way we do that is by creating a key. So I'll create a variable here and call it chart key and set chart key. Okay, so this is going to be a number and I'm going to initialize this to be 0. The reason why I'm doing this is because if you didn't know, whenever a key changes in a component, React will trigger a re-render. That's why I'm passing this chart key here. So now we need to, every time that we change this chart date, we need to set this chart key. So this has to be done inside the use effect. And I'll put this after setting the chart data. I'll set chart key and then passing the previous value plus 1. I'll just go ahead and increment this, over and over again. It doesn't really matter. Okay, now we're doing this, so I'll delete this comment. Now something that I was forgetting is that this use effect is only going to run once when the component mounts. Otherwise, if we don't provide any in this array of dependencies. So because I want to run this refetch every time that the chart, the current date, actually, the current date changes, I want to run this as well as the transaction type. So transaction type, if this changes, which means every time I switch between income and expense in the device, if this changes, I want to refetch with new data, right? And also the period. So period, we're not changing the period. We don't have anything to track the period, but if we had a variable to track the period, it would be a good idea to have it inside this array of dependencies. So let's go ahead and hit save with this. Okay, so let's switch to expense. And now we are effectively triggering a re-render. That's why we are able to see this fetch. Now I have a warning here. I won't pay attention to that, but now it's working. And look at this. This is a small item that is gray, and it's less than 100. which means our data processing is working. And maybe if you have something here, you know, we can say yellow, for example, and you can start playing around with these values, right? But yeah, I just set this to be gray for now. You can play around with the colors. Now let's move on to the fun part, which is going to be changing the week, right? So to change the week, we need to add a couple of buttons. So let's go ahead and let's do that. I'll start by creating a view here, and I'll import from React Native. I'll add this segmented control inside this view, and I'll create a button. I'll use a touchable opacity for this from React Native. Oops. Touchable opacity from React Native. And now in here, you can have, you know, whatever you want. But in this case, I'll be using this symbol view component. And by the way, if you want to learn more about these symbols, you can go to my YouTube channel, and I have this new symbols tutorial, and you can check it out if you want to learn more about how to use the symbols, the new Expo symbols library. Yeah, so I'm gonna be using that in here, and I won't be explaining a lot since we already have a video on that. But yeah, let's import this from Expo symbols, and this is going to take a name, and the name of this symbol is going to be a chevron, chevron left circle fill, and hit save, and that's how it looks. So it looks nice. I'll provide a size of 40. Then I will provide a type. The type is going to be hierarchical, and the tint color is going to be gray. Okay, and if I hit save, this is how it looks. Now what I want to do is add a label, because this is going to be hard to understand like that. So let's add a text and say Prev week. All right, that's how it looks. Now I need to add a little bit of styling here so that this looks good. So I'll say align items to the center. Okay, and now it looks good. Now, I will create another button, so I can just copy paste this and put it in here. This is going to be next week. And yeah, everything else should be the same. Now this is going to be right. Hit save. Okay, and it looks good. Now let's go to the container view, this one, and say style. I want to say flex direction row, and justify content, space between. Let's see what happens. All right, something happened in there. Let me say align item center. Nothing is fixing it. And I'll just add a marking top now that I'm here of 16, so that we have some spacing between the chart. Now this segmented view, we need to add a style for this. And I'll add a width of 200. Okay. Or we can say, 180, I think should be enough. There we go. So because we didn't provide that, it was with 0 width. So we need to specify the width here. Cool. So this is looking very nice. Now we need to add the functionality whenever we press previous and next. And by the way, this previous and next text. So let's see if I can do both at the same time. I'll add a style. And I'll add a font size of 11 and color gray. All right, that looks so much better. Nice. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and create the handler for this. So if you remember, we already have this get week range based on the current date. So integrating the previous and next week, it's going to be fairly easy. Let's create a handle previous week. This is going to be an arrow function, and set the current date. That's all we need to do. set current date. Now, the new date is going to be equal to a new date. I'll grab the current date, and if I want to get the previous one, I need to set the date to be the current date, get date, minus 7 days, right? So I'll say minus 7 days. It's safe. Now let's add this handler to our button down here for the previous. So I'll say on press, handle previous week. Now let's see if this works. Let's move to the previous week. And it looks that it's working fine. Cool, right? Now let's duplicate this. Let's paste it here, and I'll say handle next week. And the only thing we need to do is just increase 7 days. So I'll say plus 7. And as you may imagine, guys, now for handling months, we can, increase instead of days, increase month and year and so on. So maybe that should be easy to integrate, but I don't know, we'll see. You can try it on your own if you want. So I'll handle next week, and let's move to the next week. Okay, and it's working super nice. Now I can switch between expense and income with the same date. So sometimes we don't have expenses, but we have income. But in this week, for example, we have both. We have income and also expenses. All right. Now that we have this, we can, start improving the styling of this hello chart, which looks terrible. So I want to show the total, right, of this week. Now we already have this. The total, well, this text is going to depend on the transaction type. So let's validate this quickly. If the transaction type is an expense, I want to say spending. Otherwise, I want to say income. All right, hit save. Now it says total income. And if I switch, it says total spending. All right, that looks good. Let's duplicate this. By the way, I'll add a style of gray, color gray, and hit save. Okay, so that's the total. Now I need to show the actual number. So for that, I'll delete this, and I'll add a $sign, and then I'll just grab the bar, the data. So which is the chart data. Once I have this, I can just simply, I know that this is an array, right, of elements. So I can just iterate over each element and add the value and show the total in here. So we can use the reduce function, which it's great for, performing operations that require to know or have a counter. So in this case, we will have this callback function, and we can add the total and the item. So we can return the total plus the item dot value. And then we need to specify a, let's see if I can see it here. We need to specify the initial value, which is going to be 0 of the counter. And then hit save. And we are able to see the number. Now let's go here and add a style on weight of 700. Hit save. Font size. Now what's going on in here? On weight. Why is this complaining? Oh, I think this is a string. Okay, so let's pass now a font size of 32. Hit save. And finally, I just say margin bottom of 16. All right, I'm loving this. Looks really nice. And if I switch to income, the value is going to change, and we are going to calculate this again, which is pretty cool. All right, so now we have the total, but I don't know the dates, right? I don't know the range that I'm dealing with. So let's go ahead and create a new text gray. Actually, I think this shouldn't be gray. This should be big. So I'll say font size of 18 and font weight of 700 as well. All right, hit save. Then instead of having this total income, I want to have, the current date, and we can say to locale date string. This is going to be the date, right? But this to locate date string function actually allows you to specify the type of date. So in this case, it's going to be US. But then I can also specify some options in here, like the month. So the type of month that I want is short. So let's hit save, and I can, quickly have the month. So I know that at least we are in May, and if I keep moving to the left, eventually it's going to change to April. Cool, but we need more. So I'll create a space in here, and down here, I'll duplicate this, and now I'll say get date. Let me remove this because get date does not support that. So get date will get me the day, which is 27. All right. So from here, I can, have a dash and then move on to the next date. So for the next date, I'll have the same, but in this case, I'll have the current date. Okay. So the first one is the end date, and the other one is going to be the current date. So remember, we are updating the current date all the time. That's why I'm putting this to the right. This is going to be always the end of the window of this week. So I'll say to locate string, US, month short, hit save. Now I get the month again, because it could happen that we have 2 months, right, for these 7 days. And finally, I'll duplicate this and say current date, get date, and just delete this and this. Okay, so yeah, at the beginning, it's going to be April 27. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong here. Oh, I see my error. So the error is that we are setting the end date instead of setting the end date with the start date. Okay, so there we go. Cool. Now it worked. There we go. Ah, look at this bug. So that is very easy to fix. We can just go to the total and say that we only want 2 values by saying to fix to 2. Okay, and that's how it looks. Now everything will be consistent throughout the entire application. There we go, guys. And basically that's all I wanted to show you. We were able to get this data, give it this really nice style to this chart in a very easy manner, animating it, taking advantage of all this customization that they provide. And yes, I mean, from here, what you can do is start integrating month and then year, and then, display the values. So keep in mind that right now we are just handling the weekly, but yeah, should be fairly easy from here to start integrating the month and then year, and maybe you can provide more stats, right? Like for example, the total, like the difference between the income and expense for this week, instead of showing only income and expense data, because this is hard to see, right? I know that this week I was I had 4,000 income, but in the expense I have to go and check and then do the math by myself. So would be a good idea to calculate this automatically and put it on the right maybe. And yeah, so that's all I wanted to show you guys. I hope you liked this video. I hope you learned something new. Don't forget to go to codewithbeto.dev. Check out the source code for this project. It's going to be available completely for free once I'm done. It's going to be here. And check out the videos. Don't forget to subscribe, leave it a comment, and otherwise I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye.